I'm Elizabeth Miller on my husband's 60th birthday. He told 50 guests, the best gift would be your death. That night I decided he was right. I would disappear. By morning I'd emptied our accounts and left an envelope exposing his crimes. He wanted me gone. He got his wish. But first hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because what happens next will shock you. This is my story of revenge, rebirth, and justice. I should have known something was wrong when Richard insisted on the champagne tower. It wasn't his style. Too showy, too extravagant for a man who prided himself on understated wealth. But there it stood in our living room, crystal flutes stacked in a glittering pyramid, catching the amber light from the chandelier I'd picked out 15 years ago. Back when I still believed we were building something together, the house hummed with conversation. Colleagues from the construction company, our neighbors, the Hendersons and the Pratts, Richard's college friends who still called him Rick and slapped his back like they were all 22 again. I'd spent 3 days preparing, catering coordinated, flowers arranged, every surface polished until it gleamed. I wore the navy dress Richard had bought me last Christmas. He said it made me look appropriate. I was 55 years old, and my husband bought me appropriate dresses. Elizabeth, darling, this is spectacular. Margaret Chen touched my elbow, her smile warm, but her eyes, those eyes saw too much. She was Richard's business partner's wife, had been watching our marriage unravel in slow motion for years. You've outdone yourself. Thank you, I murmured, already scanning the room for whatever disaster might need preventing. It was my superpower, anticipating Richard's needs before he voiced them. 28 years of marriage had made me fluent in his disappointments. The evening flowed like it was supposed to. Laughter erupted in clusters. Someone told the story about Richard closing the Riverside deal. He stood near the fireplace, holding court, his silver hair catching the light just right. He looked distinguished, successful. Nothing like the man who told me that morning that I was letting myself go. I was refilling the hors d'oeuvres when I heard the tinkling of metal against crystal. The room fell silent. Richard stood with a champagne flute raised, that smile I used to love spreading across his face. Everyone turned toward him, expectant. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his voice carrying that practiced charm he used with clients. 60 years old, hard to believe, isn't it? Murmurs of agreement, someone shouted. You don't look a day over 50, Rick. His eyes found mine across the room. Something flickered there, something I couldn't quite name, something that made my stomach clench. I've been blessed, he continued. A successful business, wonderful friends, this beautiful home. He paused, and the pause stretched too long. The smile on his face shifted, became something else, something cruel, and of course, my devoted wife, Elizabeth. The way he said devoted made it sound like an insult. You know, he said, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. When people ask what I want for my birthday, it's hard to answer. What do you get a man who has everything? Another pause, another smile. But if I'm being honest, truly honest, the best birthday present Elizabeth could give me would be to disappear. Someone gasped. I wasn't sure who, or even better. He raised his glass higher, that smile never wavering. Her death. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, frozen, a platter of prosciutto-wrapped melon in my hands, 60 eyes on me, 60 witnesses to my humiliation. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. David Pratt stared at his shoes. Someone coughed uncomfortably. Richard laughed, actually laughed as if he told a joke. Come on, people, it's my birthday. Where's your sense of humor? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but they died quickly. The party was over, even if no one was leaving yet. I set down the platter carefully, precisely, because if I didn't focus on something simple, I might shatter. Then I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my prison, really, and closed the door. Through the floor, I could hear Richard's voice rising again, smooth as bourbon, explaining away what everyone had just witnessed. I sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 28 years and made a decision. He wanted me to disappear, then I would disappear. I didn't sleep that night. I listened to Richard stumble to bed around 2, reeking of scotch and self-satisfaction. He didn't try to apologize. He never did. At 5:47 a.m., While he snored beside me, I rose and dressed in the dark. Jeans, a sweater, comfortable shoes, the uniform of a woman with somewhere to go. The house held its breath as I moved through it, gathering what I needed, my grandmother's ring, the one thing Richard never knew about, hidden in a box of old photographs, my birth certificate, the flash drive I'd been updating for 3 years, meticulously documenting every fraudulent signature, every falsified contract, every scheme Richard had woven using my name as cover. He thought I was too simple to notice, too devoted to care. I remembered the day I'd discovered it. 2 years ago, sorting through papers for tax season, I'd found a contract for the Morrison project. My signature at the bottom, except I'd never signed it. The pen strokes were close, practiced, but the capital E was wrong. Too looped. I'd said nothing, just started watching more carefully, photographing documents, saving emails, building my evidence like I'd built everything else in our life, quietly, methodically, unseen. The sun was rising when I logged into our joint account. I transferred exactly half to an account I'd opened 6 months ago at a bank across town. Richard had added me as an authorized user on everything. His fatal mistake, assuming I'd never have the courage to use that access. Next, I called the mortgage company. "I need to discuss our home loan," I said, my voice steady. "I'm removing my name from the co-signer agreement." The representative hesitated. "Ma'am, that will trigger a review of your husband's income and assets. The loan might not qualify without your credit score supporting it." "I understand." The car was next. My name was primary on the loan. I'd been the one with perfect credit when we bought it. 3 phone calls, and I'd initiated the repossession process. Richard would wake up to find his Mercedes gone by noon. In his office, everything looked exactly as he'd left it. Scattered papers, half-empty coffee cup, a photograph of us from 10 years ago, when I still smiled like I meant it. I placed the manila envelope dead center on his desk, where he couldn't possibly miss it in sight. Copies of everything, the forged signatures, the shell companies, the bribes disguised as consulting fees, enough to bury him. I didn't leave a note. What would I say? That I'd finally learned the lesson he'd been teaching me for 28 years, that I was worth more than his contempt. As I walked through each room one last time, memories ambushed me. The kitchen where I'd made 1,000 meals he barely tasted. The living room where I'd hosted parties for his advancement. The bedroom where I'd slowly disappeared. I'd loved this house once. I'd loved him once. The thought came unbidden. I'd loved the man I thought he was, the man he'd pretended to be in the beginning, when he needed me to help build his construction company from nothing, when my business degree and my grandfather's small loan had been the foundation of everything he had. Funny how quickly foundation became cage. My car, an older Honda I'd kept for errands, sat in the garage next to the space that would soon be empty. I loaded my 2 suitcases, took one last look at the house that had never really been mine, and backed out of the driveway. The neighborhood was still asleep. The Pratt's sprinklers clicked on automatically. A newspaper lay wrapped in plastic on the Hendersons' lawn. Everything normal, everything the same, except I was driving away and I wasn't coming back. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but my eyes stayed dry. At the corner of Maple and 5th, I should have turned left, toward downtown, toward the bank, toward everything familiar. Instead, I turned right. The highway stretched before me. Ribbons of asphalt leading to anywhere but here. I merged into the early morning traffic, just another anonymous car heading somewhere else. In my rearview mirror, the house disappeared, then the neighborhood, then the city itself. Richard wanted me gone. He was about to discover what that actually meant. The mountains appeared gradually, like a promise emerging from morning fog. I'd been driving for 9 hours, stopping only for gas and cheap coffee that tasted like liquid regret. Somewhere around the New Mexico border, I'd made the decision. Colorado, fair enough to feel like escape, close enough that I wouldn't run out of money before finding work. Pinewood Valley wasn't on any tourist maps. Population 3,200, nestled in a valley between peaks that scraped the sky. I found it by accident, took a wrong turn off the highway, and suddenly there it was, a main street lined with brick buildings that remembered when mining was king. The motel was called Mountain View, though the view was mostly of a parking lot, $40 a night, paid in cash. The woman at the desk had steel gray hair and didn't ask questions. I loved her immediately. "Looking for work?" she asked, handing me a key attached to a wooden paddle. "Room 7. Is it that obvious?" "Honey, everyone who comes here is looking for something." She smiled, not unkindly. "Henderson's Cafe is hiring. Tell Mrs. Henderson that Rose sent you." The room smelled like pine cleaner and old cigarettes. The bed sagged in the middle. The shower coughed rust before running clear. It was perfect. Anonymous, cheap, mine. I sat on the bed and let myself feel it all. Terror, relief, grief, freedom. They tangled together until I couldn't tell which was which. Henderson's Cafe occupied a corner building downtown, its windows fogged with steam. A bell chimed when I entered. The smell hit me first. Coffee, cinnamon, something baking. Half a dozen customers scattered at tables. Everyone knowing everyone, the way small towns work. Behind the counter stood a woman who could have been anywhere from 60 to 80. Her silver hair in a neat bun, her apron dusted with flour. "Help you?" she asked, not looking up from the espresso machine. "Rose at the motel said you might be hiring." Now she looked up. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. "You have restaurant experience." I thought about all those dinner parties, all those perfectly orchestrated events. I managed hospitality for years. I'm good with people, and I learn fast. "Can you start Monday?" "I can start now." She studied me for a long moment, and I wondered what she saw. A woman running, a woman starting over, a woman who'd finally stopped being invisible. "I'm Martha Henderson. I open at 6, close at 6, $7 an hour plus tips. Monday through Saturday. You show up on time, work hard, we'll get along fine." "Elizabeth," I said, then hesitated. "Elizabeth Miller." I kept the name. Let him try to find me. That first week passed in a blur of muscle memory and adaptation. Memorizing orders, learning the vintage espresso machine's moods, discovering that Tom always wanted his coffee black and hot enough to strip paint, that Sarah took her latte with oat milk and 2 sugars, that the corner booth belonged to a group of retired miners who'd been meeting there for 30 years. The work was simple, honest. No one asked me to be anything except present. I rented a studio apartment above the hardware store, 400 square feet, a window that overlooked Main Street, a kitchen the size of a closet. At night I could hear the wind moving through the pines, a sound like the earth breathing. I bought groceries at the local market, enough for 1 person, which felt strange after decades of shopping for 2. I learned to cook small portions, to eat dinner at a table, without the weight of someone's disappointment across from me. Some mornings, I woke up and forgot where I was. Then I'd remember, really remember, and the lightness that filled my chest felt like flight. Martha didn't pry, but she noticed things, the way my hands shook the first few days, how I startled at loud noises, the careful way I counted my tips, like someone for whom every dollar mattered. "You running from something or toward something?" she asked one afternoon during the slow period. I wiped down the counter, considering, "Both, I think." She nodded, satisfied. That's usually how it works. 3 weeks in, I realized I'd stopped checking over my shoulder, stopped waiting for Richard to appear, stopped living like I owed the world an apology for existing. The mountains stood eternal outside the window, indifferent to my small human drama, and for the first time in 28 years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't witness Richard's unraveling firsthand, but I learned about it later, pieced together from news articles, phone calls I didn't answer, and one devastating email from Margaret Chen that arrived 6 weeks after I left. He found the envelope at 7:23 a.m. On a Tuesday, Margaret told me he'd called her husband Daniel, his voice cracking with something between rage and panic. "She took everything. The account is empty. My car is gone, and there's..." A pause. "There's an envelope." I imagined his hands shaking as he opened it, the realization spreading across his face like spilled ink as he read page after page of his own crimes, meticulously documented in my neat handwriting. Contract Baga 4782, signature forged, February 2023, Morrison deal, environmental permits falsified using my credentials, Riverside project, bribed city inspector $15,000, traced to our joint account, 27 pages, 3 years of fraud, all of it enough to destroy him. According to Margaret, His first call was to his lawyer. His second was to the bank, where he discovered the mortgage company had begun reviewing his loan. Without my income, without my credit score anchoring his applications, Richard Miller Construction was built on quicksand. By noon, his Mercedes had been repossessed from the driveway. The neighbors definitely noticed that. The next week brought a cascade of consequences. A client called to question irregularities in their billing. Then another. Word spreads fast in construction circles, especially when money goes missing. Richard tried to explain it away. My wife! She handled the finances. She must have made mistakes. But the forged signatures were too precise, too deliberate to be mistakes. That's when Catherine Evans stepped forward. I'd met Catherine twice. Richard's business associate, impeccably dressed, sharp as cut glass. At a company holiday party, she'd smiled at me with too many teeth and said, "You're so lucky to have a husband who handles everything." I could never trust someone else with my business. Now she appeared at Richard's office with coffee and sympathy. "I've been reviewing the accounts," she told him. According to the deposition transcript Margaret sent me months later, "I think I can help straighten this out." Richard, desperate and drowning, let her in. What he didn't know, what I'd suspected but couldn't prove when I left, was that Catherine had been manipulating the numbers for years. She'd been using Richard's ego and my signatures to create a web of shell companies, siphoning money while he took credit for deals she'd actually closed. She'd been stealing from him while he'd been stealing from everyone else. Margaret's email painted the picture. "He's not sleeping. Lost 15 pounds in a month. Yesterday I saw him at the grocery store and barely recognized him. He asked about you, wanted to know if I'd heard from you. I told him no, Elizabeth. Whatever you did. He deserved it, I want you to know that." The construction company hemorrhaged clients. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Partners distanced themselves, suddenly remembering previous engagements when Richard called. But the worst part, according to Margaret, was the social death. Invitations stopped coming. The country club lost his membership renewal. At the grocery store, people who'd raised glasses at his birthday party now avoided his aisle. Scottsdale is a small pond for big fish. Richard had been king, and now he was the cautionary tale people whispered about over brunch. He hired a private investigator to find me. Cost him $3,000, and 2 weeks before the man reported back. She doesn't want to be found, and she's good at it. I learned all this because Richard, in his desperation, tried one final play. He sent me an email, my old address that forwarded to the new one I'd created. "Elizabeth, I know you're reading this. You need to come back, fix what you've broken. We can work this out. I'll forgive what you did if you just come home and explain to everyone that you made accounting errors. It was a misunderstanding. Come back, please." The word please must have hurt him to type. I read it once, sitting in my small apartment above the hardware store, drinking tea from a chipped mug I'd bought at the thrift shop. Then I deleted it. Richard wanted me to save him the way I'd been saving him for 28 years. Quietly, invisibly sacrificing myself so he could shine. But I'd stopped being his foundation. Now I was building something of my own. He started coming in every Tuesday and Thursday at 3:15 p.m., always sitting at the table by the window. Black coffee, no sugar, a slice of whatever pie was fresh. He'd bring a leather briefcase worn soft with age, pull out case files, and work quietly for an hour, his reading glasses perched on his nose. I noticed him the way you notice a change in the weather, gradually, then all at once. "The usual?" I asked on his 4th visit. He looked up surprised that I'd remembered. His eyes were gray like the sky before snow, kind eyes with crow's feet that suggested he smiled often. "The usual would be perfect, thank you." "Elizabeth," I said, offering my name like a gift I wasn't sure I was ready to give. "Michael Turner." His handshake was firm. "Warm, best coffee in 3 counties, in case you were wondering. I'll tell Martha you said so." Over the weeks, we developed a rhythm. He'd arrive, I'd bring his coffee before he asked. Sometimes we'd chat, small talk about the weather, the town, nothing too deep. He never pried, never pushed. It was refreshing, being around someone who didn't need to know your story to treat you like a person. Then one Thursday, in early November, he arrived looking troubled. He ordered coffee but barely touched it. staring at his papers with a furrow between his brows. "Everything okay?" I asked during a lull. He glanced up, seemed to debate something internal, then sighed. "Client case, divorce. The husband's been financially abusive for years, hiding assets, forging her signature on loans. She only just discovered it." He removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. "She's terrified to leave, thinks she can't make it on her own." My hand trembled slightly as I refilled his cup. "What will you tell her?" "That she's stronger than she knows, that starting over is scary, but staying is scarier." He looked at me then, really looked, and I wondered what he saw. That sometimes disappearing is the bravest thing you can do. The silence stretched between us, filled with things unsaid. "I'm a family law attorney," he continued, his voice gentle, "specializing in cases involving financial abuse, psychological manipulation. I've seen what it does to people, how it makes them doubt their own reality." He paused. "If you ever need someone to talk to, Elizabeth, legally or otherwise, my door's open. No pressure, no judgment." I should have said, "Thank you," and walked away. Instead, I found myself sitting across from him, the cafe mercifully empty, except for Tom dozing in the corner booth. "How did you know?" I whispered. "The way you count your tips like every dollar is salvation. How you startle when someone raises their voice. The fact that you're working here, in this town, under what I suspect is your real name, despite clearly running from something." His smile was sad. "I've seen it before too many times. I'm not your client." "No," he agreed. "You're not. But I'd like to be your friend, if you'll let me." It took 3 more weeks before I told him everything. We met for dinner at the only restaurant in town that wasn't Henderson's, a small Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. I told him about the party, the humiliation, Richard's years of contempt disguised as marriage, the fraud I discovered, my carefully planned escape. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "You did the right thing," he said when I finished. "All of it, leaving, taking the money, exposing the fraud. You protected yourself. Sometimes I feel guilty. Guilt is what abusers leave behind. It's their parting gift." He reached across the table, stopped just short of taking my hand. "You don't owe him anything, not loyalty, not silence, not your safety, nothing." The words cracked something open inside me, some sealed place where I'd been storing 28 years of doubt. We started having dinner regularly after that, then walks through the town, watching the leaves turn gold and fall. He told me about his daughter in Seattle, his late wife who'd passed 5 years ago, the cases that kept him up at night. I told him about the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming on a cold December evening, walking back from dinner, snow beginning to fall. He kissed me. It was nothing like Richard's kisses, those calculated gestures of ownership. This was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. "Is this okay?" Michael whispered against my lips. I kissed him back, tasting possibility and hope and something that felt dangerously like happiness. "Yes," I said, "this is okay." Martha collapsed during the lunch rush on a Wednesday in January. One moment she was pouring coffee. The next she was on the floor, Tom and Sarah rushing to help. The ambulance took her to County General, and the doctor's words echoed in the empty cafe afterward. Exhaustion, stress, high blood pressure. She needs at least a month of rest, which left Henderson's cafe without Henderson. "Close it down," Martha said from her hospital bed, looking smaller somehow in the white sheets. "I can't afford to pay someone to manage it, and I can't run it from here." I thought about the regulars who'd lose their gathering place, about Sarah, who came in every morning after dropping her kids at school, needing that hour of adult conversation, about the retired miners who'd been meeting in that corner booth for 30 years. What if I ran it? The word surprised me as much as her. Martha's eyebrows rose. "You've been here 3 months. I know the customers. I know the systems. I know how you like things done." I sat on the edge of her bed. "Let me try. If I mess it up, you can fire me when you're back on your feet." She studied me with those sharp eyes. "Why would you do this?" "Because this cafe had become my sanctuary. Because these people had given me back something I'd lost. Purpose. Because I was tired of just surviving and ready to start building. Because I owe you," I said simply. She squeezed my hand. "Okay, but if you burn my kitchen down, I'll haunt you." The first week was chaos. I learned the hard way that the espresso machine required a specific sequence, or it would overflow, that we needed to order dairy every Tuesday, or we'd run out by Thursday, that Tom's usual was slightly different from what I'd been serving him. But I learned, and more importantly, I started to experiment. It started with my grandmother's lemon cake, the recipe I'd memorized watching her bake every Sunday of my childhood. I made one on a whim, left it under the glass dome on the counter with a handwritten sign, "Homemade lemon cake, $3 a slice." By noon, it was gone. "That was incredible," Sarah said. Crumbs still on her plate. "Best thing I've tasted since moving here. Will you make it again?" I made 3 the next day. Sold out by 2 p.m. Word spread the way it does in small towns. Quickly, enthusiastically, with exaggeration. By the end of the week, people were calling ahead to reserve slices the following Monday. I added chocolate bourbon cake. Then on Wednesday, my grandmother's apple cinnamon masterpiece. The cafe transformed. What had been a place for coffee and basic sandwiches became somewhere people lingered, where mothers brought their daughters for special treats, where the miners started ordering dessert with their coffee. I discovered something I'd never known about myself. I loved to bake, not the performative baking I'd done for Richard's colleagues. Those magazine-perfect cakes designed to impress. This was different. This was alchemy, flour, butter, sugar, and heat transforming into something that made people smile. I experimented, failed, tried again. A lavender honey cake that divided opinion. The older crowd hated it. The younger women loved it. A bourbon pecan pie that had Tom declaring me a genius. A chai spice creation that became an instant bestseller. The cafe's revenue doubled, then tripled. Martha called every few days. "Elizabeth, people are telling me my cafe is the best restaurant in the valley now. What did you do?" "I just baked some cakes, Martha." She laughed, the sound incredulous. "Honey, you did more than that. You gave people something to celebrate." Michael started coming in more often, ostensibly for the cake, but really to see me. He'd sit at his usual table, watching me work with a smile that made my chest warm. "You look happy," he observed one evening as I locked up. I paused, considering. Flour dusted my jeans. My back ached from being on my feet all day. My hands smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. I realized. For the first time in decades, I actually am. He kissed me, then soft and sweet, tasting like the chocolate cake he'd had for dinner. "Good," he whispered. "You deserve happy." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I baked a small cake just for myself, chocolate with raspberry filling, my favorite that Richard had always hated. I ate a slice standing at my window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the stars. Somewhere in Arizona, Richard was probably still trying to salvage his empire, still convinced I'd ruined his life. Here, in this small Colorado town, I was building something entirely my own, and it was delicious. The email from Margaret arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, marked urgent. "You need to know this." I almost deleted it, almost. But something in the subject line made me click. "Elizabeth, I don't know if you're still reading these, but Richard's world is imploding in ways even you might not have predicted. Catherine Evans, you remember her? Just threw him under the bus to save herself. Turns out she's been embezzling for years. She manipulated everything, used both your names, and now she's cooperating with investigators to avoid prison. Richard found out yesterday. Daniel says he's never seen a man look so destroyed. Thought you should know." M attached with 3 news articles and a police report. I sat in the cafe's back office, coffee growing cold beside me, reading about Richard's complete unraveling. Catherine had been brilliant. I'd give her that. While Richard had been forging my signatures and taking credit for deals, she'd been creating an entire shadow empire. Shell companies registered in Delaware, accounts in the Cayman Islands, a systematic siphoning of money that made Richard's fraud look like amateur hour. She'd used his ego like a scalpel, letting him believe he was the mastermind while she pulled the strings. Every time he'd taken credit for a deal, every time he'd puffed himself up about closing a difficult contract, Catherine had been in the background, actually doing the work, and stealing a percentage off the top. The police report detailed their confrontation. Richard had discovered discrepancies in accounts Catherine had been helping him straighten out when he confronted her. She'd laughed, according to the transcript. She'd said, "You think you were the only one smart enough to commit fraud, Richard? You were just the patsy, the face of the operation while I did the real work, and now you'll take the fall while I cut a deal." She'd walked out of his office and straight into a meeting with the district attorney. The plea bargain was elegant in its cruelty. Catherine would testify against Richard, provide evidence of his fraud, and in exchange receive probation and house arrest instead of prison time. She'd turn over the shell companies, reveal where she'd hidden the money, and burn Richard's life to ashes. Richard had no leverage, no evidence against her that didn't also incriminate himself, no allies left. They'd all distanced themselves when the fraud investigation began. A second email from Margaret arrived an hour later. "Forgot to mention, Richard hired a private investigator. He's trying to find you. Says if he can just talk to you, you'll come back and help him. Daniel told him to stop, that you're never coming back, but he's obsessed. Be careful." My hands shook as I deleted both emails. Michael arrived at noon, concern etched on his face. Word traveled fast. Even between states, when you had legal connections, you heard, I said. Not a question. I heard. He sat across from me in the empty cafe. "Elizabeth, there's more. The investigator Richard hired. He's good. It's only a matter of time before he finds me." I finished the sentence, feeling cold despite the warm cafe. "Before he tries to find you," Michael corrected. "But you have options. Legal options, a restraining order, protective measures. You didn't commit any crimes. He did. You were protecting yourself from fraud and abuse. Richard won't see it that way. He'll see it as me destroying him, as me being responsible for Catherine, for the bankruptcy, for everything." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. I know how he thinks. He'll convince himself that if I just come back, if I just sign the right papers or make the right statement, he can fix this. "Will you go back?" The question hung in the air between us. I thought about the woman who'd stood in that living room 5 months ago, holding a platter of prosciutto-wrapped melon while her husband wished her dead. I thought about the small apartment above the hardware store, the cafe full of people who knew me as the Elizabeth the baker, not Elizabeth the invisible wife. I thought about Michael's kisses and Martha's trust, and the mountains that stood eternal outside my window. "No," I said, the words solid as stone. "I'm never going back." Michael nodded, satisfied. "Then we prepare. Because he's coming, Elizabeth. Men like Richard always do." He was right, of course. Richard was coming, but I wasn't the same woman who'd left anymore. And this time, I was ready to fight. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon in March, when the cafe was full and the sun was streaming through the windows. I was laughing at something Tom had said, carrying a slice of lemon cake to table 3, when the bell above the door chimed. I turned automatically, smile still on my face, and there he was, Richard. He looked terrible, gaunt, his expensive suit hanging loose, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the crowded cafe, and I watched him register everything. My flour-dusted apron, my smile, the way I belonged here in a way I'd never belonged in Arizona. "Elizabeth?" His voice cracked on my name. The cafe went silent. Small towns have excellent radar for drama. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." He took a step forward. Tom rose from his booth, positioning himself between us. "Please, Elizabeth, 5 minutes. You owe me that much." The audacity nearly made me laugh. "I owe you nothing. You destroyed my life." His voice rose, drawing stares. "Everything I built, gone, the company, the house, my reputation, because of you, because you couldn't just—" He stopped, seeming to realize he was making a scene. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, pleading, "Come home, help me fix this. Tell the investigators it was a misunderstanding, that you made accounting mistakes. We can work this out, Liz. We always do. Don't call me that." The old nickname felt like acid. "And I'm not coming back. Not today. Not ever. You're my wife. I was your punching bag, your free labor, your scapegoat." I set down the cake carefully, turned to face him fully. "You wished me dead in front of 50 people, Richard. You got what you wanted. I disappeared. I didn't mean. It was a joke." It wasn't a joke. It was the truth finally spoken out loud. I stepped closer, aware of Michael entering through the back door. alerted by Sarah's frantic text. You spent 28 years making me feel worthless, telling me I was too old, too stupid, too useless, using my name to commit fraud while treating me like I was nothing. I gave you everything. His face flushed red. That house, that life, I built that life. I made your company possible. My money, my credit, my work, all of it while you took credit and treated me like furniture. The words tumbled out. Years of silence breaking like a dam. And when Catherine was stealing from you, when she was using both our names to commit actual crimes, where were you? Taking credit for deals you didn't close while she robbed you blind. If you'd just stayed, if you'd been doing your job. My job, I laughed. And it sounded wild even to me. My job was being your wife, not your accountant, not your lawyer, not your shield against your own incompetence. You failed, Richard. You failed yourself. I just stopped catching you when you fell. His hand shot out, grabbed my wrist. You're coming back. You're going to fix this. Michael's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Remove your hand from her now. Richard looked up, noticed Michael for the first time. His grip tightened. Who the hell are you? Her attorney? And if you don't let go in the next 3 seconds, I'm calling the police for assault. Richard released me, but his eyes stayed on Michael, calculating. Her attorney, of course. She already replaced me. I didn't replace you, I said quietly. I found myself. The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later. Sarah had called while Richard was still ranting. Deputy Martinez took statements while Richard paced outside, visible through the window, making angry phone calls. He threatened you, Michael said, his lawyer voice firm and factual. Multiple witnesses heard him say he'd make you fix this whether you wanted to or not. That's harassment at minimum, potentially intimidation of a witness given the ongoing investigation. Deputy Martinez nodded, writing everything down. Ma'am, do you want to press charges? I looked at Richard through the window. He looked back, and for a moment I saw not the man who destroyed my self-worth, but a pathetic figure who destroyed himself and couldn't accept it. I want a restraining order, I said. He's not allowed within 500 feet of me, my workplace, or my home. If he violates it, then I'll press charges. We can arrange that. The deputy closed his notebook. I'll escort him out of town. He'll be served with the paperwork by tomorrow. That night, in Michael's living room with its stone fireplace and walls lined with books, I finally allowed myself to shake. I handled it wrong, I said. I shouldn't have engaged, shouldn't have yelled. You handled it perfectly. Michael wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. You stood up for yourself. You told the truth. That takes incredible courage. I'm terrified he'll come back. He won't, and if he does, we'll be ready. We have witnesses, documentation, legal protection. He sat beside me, took my hand. Elizabeth, you're not alone in this. You have a whole town that just watched you face down your abuser and stand your ground. Tom's already spreading the word. You're a hero to half the women in Pinewood Valley. I laughed despite myself. A hero who makes good cake, the best cake. He kissed my temple. But also, yes, a hero. The restraining order was served the next morning. Richard left Colorado, but not before leaving one final voicemail. This isn't over, Elizabeth. You'll have to testify about those documents you left, and when you do, everyone will see what you really are. I saved the voicemail. Evidence, Michael called it, but I called it something else. The sound of a drowning man grasping at straws. Richard was right about one thing, though. This wasn't over. The real reckoning was still coming. The subpoena arrived on a Monday morning in April, delivered by a process server who apologized 3 times while handing it to me. Elizabeth Miller, you are hereby required to appear before the Superior Court of Maricopa County, Arizona, to provide testimony in the matter of the state versus Richard Allen Miller and Catherine Marie Evans. Michael read it twice, his jaw tight. They need you to authenticate the documents you left and to testify about the fraud. Do I have to go? Technically, yes, but Elizabeth, he looked up from the papers, his gray eyes serious. This is your chance to tell your story publicly, to make sure he faces real consequences, not just for the fraud, but for what he did to you. The thought of seeing Richard again, of being in the same room, made my stomach clench. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for 28 years, wanted to speak. I'll go, I said, but you're coming with me. Wouldn't miss it. The courthouse in Phoenix was everything Colorado wasn't: concrete and glass, harsh and unforgiving. We arrived 2 days before the hearing, staying in a modest hotel downtown. Michael prepared me like an attorney and comforted me like a partner, somehow managing both without making me feel like a case file. "They'll try to discredit you," he warned over coffee the morning before my testimony. "Richard's lawyer will paint you as vindictive, as someone who orchestrated his downfall out of spite." Let him try, I surprised myself with the steadiness in my voice. The preliminary hearing was closed, but the actual trial was public record. The courtroom filled quickly, reporters, curious citizens, Richard's former colleagues eager to watch him fall. I recognized some faces from that birthday party, people who'd witnessed my humiliation and said nothing. I sat in the witness waiting room, hands clasped in my lap, wearing the navy suit Michael had helped me choose. Professional, credible, strong. The opposite of how I felt inside, where my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Catherine testified first. I watched on the closed-circuit television, saw her calmly explain how she'd manipulated Richard's ego, used his willingness to cut corners, exploited his need to look successful. She showed spreadsheets, emails, documented conversations. She was organized, articulate, devastatingly thorough. "Mr. Miller prided himself on being a self-made man," she said, her voice flat, almost bored. "But he couldn't close a deal without me, couldn't read a contract without missing crucial details. He was the face, the charm, the handshake. I was the brain. And when I realized how easy it was to skim money while he took credit for everything, well," she shrugged, "I saw an opportunity. Richard's lawyer tried to make her the villain, suggesting she'd seduced and manipulated an innocent businessman. But Catherine had already accepted her guilt, struck her deal. There was no leverage, no way to shake her testimony. She answered every question with the same cold precision, showing no remorse, only calculation. Watching her, I felt an odd kinship. We'd both been invisible to Richard, in different ways. She'd used it to steal, I'd used it to escape. Then Richard took the stand in his own defense. Watching him walk to the witness box was surreal. The man I'd married, older now, diminished. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. The confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by something desperate, something cornered. He blamed everyone: Catherine for manipulating him, his partners for not catching the errors, the banks for being too lenient with credit, even the clients for not reading contracts more carefully. And finally, inevitably, he turned to me. "My wife handled the finances," he said, his voice steady, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this moment. "Elizabeth had access to everything: bank accounts, contracts, signing authority. She could have been involved with Catherine without my knowledge. They could have been working together to frame me. She certainly had motive. She always resented my success." The prosecutor, Sandra Reyes, objected immediately. "Speculation and blame shifting. The defendant is attempting to implicate a witness who hasn't yet testified." The judge, a severe woman in her 60s, sustained it. "Mr. Miller, confine your testimony to your own actions." But the damage was done. Richard had planted the seed of doubt, made me a potential accomplice rather than a victim. I saw a few jurors glance towards the witness room, curiosity and suspicion in their eyes. Michael squeezed my hand. "Breathe. You'll have your chance to respond." When they called my name 30 minutes later, my legs felt like water. Michael squeezed my hand once more before I stood, his touch grounding me. The walk to the witness stand lasted a lifetime. Every eye in that courtroom followed me. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help me God. I sat, arranged my hands in my lap, looked directly at Sandra Reyes and nowhere else. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult." "It is," I said honestly, my voice carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. "Can you describe your role in your husband's construction company during the early years of your marriage?" I took a breath, found my center. I was the financial administrator for the first 10 years. I managed accounts, processed payments, handled contracts and negotiations. I have a business degree from Arizona State University. I helped build Miller Construction from nothing using my grandfather's loan of $50,000 and my credit score, which at the time was excellent. Richard had vision and charm, but no capital and marginal credit. I was the foundation he built on. And later in the marriage, did your role change? Yes, around 2015. Richard gradually pushed me out of the business operations. He said I was needed more at home, that I should focus on entertaining clients and hosting events to support his networking. But he kept my name on all the major documents, kept me as co-signer on loans, kept my name on business accounts. Without your active participation, without my knowledge of how he was using those accounts. Yes, I trusted him. I believed we were partners. Sandra walked me through the documents I'd left in that envelope. Piece by piece, each forged signature projected on screens for the jury to see. Each fraudulent contract, the Morrison deal where environmental permits had been falsified, the Riverside project where a city inspector had been bribed $15,000 from our joint account. Mrs. Miller, can you explain how you discovered these irregularities? In 2023, I was organizing documents for our tax preparation. I found a contract for the Morrison project with my signature at the bottom, except I'd never seen that contract before, had never signed it. The signature was close. Richard had practiced, but the capital E was wrong, too looped. That's when I started paying closer attention. What did you do? I started documenting everything. I photographed documents when Richard wasn't home. I saved emails to a separate account. I created a digital paper trail because I knew, my voice caught, I knew that if I confronted him directly, he would gaslight me, tell me I was crazy, that I was remembering wrong. He'd done that for years about other things, small things, but I learned not to trust my own memory in our marriage. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sandra's voice was gentle. Can you explain what you mean by that? Psychological abuse, I said clearly. Richard controlled our relationship through constant criticism and manipulation. He told me I was too old, too stupid, too worthless to manage anything important. He made me doubt my own competence, my own reality. When I found evidence of fraud, I knew I had to document it carefully because he would deny everything and make me question what I'd seen. Then came the harder questions, the ones Michael had prepared me for. Mrs. Miller, your husband has testified that you might have been involved with Catherine Evans in the embezzlement scheme, that you had motive to frame him. Can you address that allegation? I looked directly at Richard for the first time since entering the courtroom. He stared back, his face unreadable. I met Catherine Evans exactly 3 times in 28 years, I said, my voice steady. Twice at company holiday parties, once at a client dinner. We never had a conversation that lasted longer than 5 minutes. I didn't have access to the offshore accounts she was manipulating. I didn't have knowledge of the shell companies she created. I was systematically excluded from business decisions while my name and credentials were used without my consent or knowledge. Why do you think your husband is making this allegation? Because Richard is doing what he's always done, blaming me for his failures, making me responsible for his choices. In our marriage, nothing was ever his fault. If dinner was cold, I'd cooked it wrong. If clients weren't happy, I hadn't entertained them properly. If his business failed, it must be because I sabotaged it. He cannot accept responsibility for his own actions. Sandra paused. Let that sink in, Mrs. Miller. I need to ask you about the night of March 15th, 2024, your husband's 60th birthday party. Can you tell the court what happened? This was it, the moment that had changed everything. Richard was celebrating his birthday. I'd spent 3 days preparing, catering, decorations, invitations. About 50 people attended, colleagues, neighbors, friends. I paused, gathering strength. During the toasts, Richard thanked everyone for coming. Then he looked at me and said that the best birthday present I could give him would be to disappear. Or even better, my death. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Several jurors looked shocked. He said this publicly, in front of guests. Yes, 50 witnesses heard him wish me dead. How did you respond? I didn't. I went upstairs to our bedroom and started planning my departure. I left the next morning. Why did you leave? The question hung in the air. This was the moment to tell the truth. All of it. Because I realized I'd been dying slowly for 28 years. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. Richard had eroded my self-worth, my confidence, my sense of self. He treated me like property, like an appliance that had outlived its usefulness. When he wished for my death in front of all those people, I understood. He'd already killed the person I used to be, and I decided that if I had any chance of surviving, I had to leave. So I took what was legally mine, exposed his fraud to protect myself from being implicated, and started over. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. No further questions. Richard's attorney, a man named Gerald Hutchins with silver hair and an expensive suit, approached for cross-examination with the predatory confidence of someone who thought he could break me. Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you were angry at your husband? That you felt he'd marginalized you? I was hurt. There's a difference. Hurt enough to orchestrate an elaborate revenge scheme. I didn't orchestrate anything except my own escape. Richard's crimes were his own. But you admit you took money from joint accounts, cancelled loans. I took exactly half of our marital assets, which I was legally entitled to. I removed myself from loans I'd co-signed, which was my right. I didn't steal. I claimed what was mine. He tried different angles, suggesting vindictiveness, suggesting I'd planned this for years, suggesting I was an unreliable narrator of my own life. But after facing Richard himself in that Colorado cafe, after months of rebuilding myself from nothing, this lawyer was just noise. Mr. Hutchins, I said finally, interrupting his fifth attempt to paint me as a villain. I didn't destroy Richard. He destroyed himself. I just stopped helping him hide it. I stopped being his cover, his excuse, his scapegoat. And yes, I documented his crimes because I knew he'd try to blame me for them eventually. I was right to protect myself. Everything I did was self-preservation, not revenge. The cross-examination ended shortly after. I was dismissed, walking back through that courtroom, past Richard, past the reporters, past everyone who'd judged me. I felt 10 feet tall. Michael met me outside, pulled me into his arms. You were incredible. I just told the truth, the most powerful thing you can do. The trial continued for 2 more days. Closing arguments, deliberation. We waited in a coffee shop across the street, Michael working on other cases while I pretended to read a book. On the 3rd day, the verdict came. Richard Miller, guilty on 12 counts of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Catherine Evans, guilty on all counts, but sentenced to 3 years probation and house arrest per her plea agreement. Richard was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, full restitution to victims, and forfeiture of all remaining assets, including the house I'd helped buy, the company I'd helped build, everything. I watched him led away in handcuffs and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not even relief, just a profound sense of ending, of a chapter finally, definitively closed. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. Mrs. Miller, how do you feel about the verdict? Michael stepped forward to deflect them, but I touched his arm. I can answer. I looked at the cameras, at the faces waiting for my pain or triumph, for something quotable and dramatic. I feel free, I said simply. For the first time in decades, I'm completely free. Richard's sentence isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And more importantly, it's about truth. The truth about what he did, about what our marriage really was, about who I really am. I hope any woman watching this who's living in a similar situation knows it's never too late to save yourself. It's never too late to start over. And with that, I walked away, Michael beside me, the Phoenix sun warm on my face, toward the rental car that would take us to the airport. Back to Colorado, back home. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, I stood in front of the building that would change everything. It was a corner lot on Main Street, brick and glass with large windows that caught the morning sun just right, throwing golden light across the worn wooden floors inside. The previous occupant had been Henderson Hardware. Old Mr. Henderson had finally retired and moved to Florida to be near his grandchildren. The building had good bones, high ceilings with exposed beams, and a history that seeped from every brick. You're sure about this? Michael asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. We'd been looking at properties for 2 months, and this was the first one that had made my heart race. I've never been more sure of anything. I squeezed his hand, felt the solid warmth of his fingers wrapped around mine. This is it. This is exactly what I've been imagining. The purchase took 3 weeks to finalize. Martha co-signed the business loan, refusing to hear any arguments. You saved my cafe, Elizabeth. Let me help you build yours. The renovations took another month. We kept the original brick walls, refinished the floors to a honey-colored gleam, installed a commercial kitchen that would have made my grandmother weep with joy. The windows got deep sills perfect for plants. The lighting was warm, golden, inviting. The sign arrived on a Tuesday, Elizabeth's Haven, cafe and community space, simple copper letters that would patina over time. Growing more beautiful with age, like me, I thought, and smiled at my own sentimentality. Martha had insisted on selling me Henderson's at a price I could actually afford. You've more than earned it, honey. But I wanted something more than just a cafe. I wanted a place that embodied everything I'd learned about survival, about starting over, about the way a simple cup of coffee and a listening ear could fundamentally change someone's life. We divided the space carefully, intentionally. The front became a full cafe, my baking at its heart, glass cases lined with cakes and pastries that made people stop and stare through the windows. I'd perfected my grandmother's lemon cake, added a chocolate bourbon creation that Tom declared better than heaven, developed a lavender honey situation that the younger crowd couldn't get enough of, comfortable seating in mismatched vintage chairs I'd collected from estate sales and thrift stores, books on floating shelves, donated by townspeople, free to borrow indefinitely, art from local artists on the walls, with small price tags if anyone wanted to buy. Everything was warm, welcoming, lived in, nothing pristine or intimidating. The back became a community room free to use, no questions asked, large table for meetings, comfortable chairs arranged in circles, a small kitchenette, soundproofing for privacy, for support groups, for planning, for healing, for whatever someone needed. Michael had connections with women's organizations across Colorado and neighboring states, survivors of domestic abuse, financial abuse, psychological manipulation. They all needed safe places to meet, to organize, to begin rebuilding. You're creating something important here, Michael said one night as we painted the community room walls a soothing sage green. Not just a business, a sanctuary. That's the idea. I stepped back, surveyed our work. I spent 28 years in a beautiful house that was actually a prison. I want this to be the opposite, a place where people feel genuinely safe, genuinely seen. Opening day drew what felt like the entire town. Tom arrived at 5:30 in the morning, insisting on being first in line, even though we weren't opening until 7. By 6, there were 20 people waiting, clutching coffee thermoses against the October chill. Martha presided over the ribbon cutting like a proud parent, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. Look at what you built, Elizabeth Miller. Look at what you made from nothing. Not from nothing, I corrected gently. From something broken. That's different. Tom cut the ribbon with ceremony, using comically oversized scissors borrowed from the new hardware store, run by his nephew, who'd inherited the building's original tenant. Sarah was crying openly. Half the women in town seemed to be filming on their phones. The doors opened and people flooded in. The sound was immediate and beautiful. Conversation, laughter, the hiss of the espresso machine. I'd learned to operate like a maestro conducting an orchestra. I'd hired 2 staff members, Jenny, recently divorced and rebuilding her credit, and Maria, a single mother of 3, who'd been working 2 jobs just to make rent. They both understood the mission without me having to explain it. My first official cake sat under glass on the main counter, a 7-layer masterpiece with dark chocolate ganache, fresh raspberry filling, and delicate chocolate shavings on top. My absolute favorite. The cake Richard had always hated, had always called too rich, too much, too extra, just like he'd called me. Michael bought the first slice, presenting me with a $20 bill like a ceremonial offering. To new beginnings, I echoed, and kissed him right there in front of God and everyone, to the sound of applause and Tom's wolf whistle. The morning rush was chaos in the best possible way. The espresso machine worked flawlessly. The cakes disappeared in slices. People lingered over coffee, in no hurry to leave, treating the space exactly how I'd hoped, like a home away from home. Around 1 o'clock, during a brief lull, a woman entered. She was mid-30s, rail-thin, with hollow eyes and a fading bruise on her left cheek that makeup couldn't quite hide. She looked around nervously. Like she might bolt at any moment. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself not so long ago. "Can I help you?" I asked gently, keeping my voice low, non-threatening. "I heard," she swallowed. Started again. "Someone told me this was a safe place, that you have a room in back, for meetings, for women who—" Her voice broke. I poured her a coffee without asking, added cream and sugar until she nodded that it was right. Then I cut a generous slice of lemon cake, slid it across the counter. "The community room is available whenever you need it. No charge, no questions, and this," I gestured around the cafe, "is free territory. No one will bother you here. You're safe, I promise." She looked at the cake, at the coffee, at me. Then she started crying, silent tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. I came around the counter, led her to a quiet corner table, sat with her while she cried. Maria brought tissues without being asked. When the woman could finally speak, I listened. Her name was Jennifer. She'd been married 9 years. Her husband controlled everything: money, friends, her phone, her car. He'd never hit her until last week, and now she didn't know what to do, where to go, how to leave. "I have 3 kids," she whispered. "I have no money of my own, no family nearby. I feel so stupid for letting it get this bad." "You're not stupid," I said firmly. "You're surviving, and now you're ready to do more than survive. You're ready to live." I connected her with Michael's office. He'd agreed to do pro bono work for anyone I referred. I gave her the number for the domestic violence shelter 2 towns over. I wrote down resources, phone numbers, escape planning strategies. But more than that, I gave her something I wished someone had given me years ago: validation, belief, the absolute certainty that she deserved better and that better was possible. When she left 2 hours later, she hugged me tight. "Thank you for understanding." "I do," I said simply. "More than you know." That evening, after closing, Michael and I sat on the bench outside Elizabeth's Haven. Watching the mountains turn purple and gold in the fading light, the October air was crisp, smelling of pine and wood smoke from someone's chimney. "You got an email today," he said, pulling out his phone. "From Margaret Chen." I took the phone, read the message that had arrived that afternoon. "Elizabeth, I hope this finds you well and happy. I thought you'd want to know. Richard was transferred to a minimum security facility in California last month. He'll be eligible for parole in 4 years if he maintains good behavior. Apparently, he's teaching other inmates about construction management and business practices. The irony isn't lost on anyone who knows the truth. More importantly, I've been following Elizabeth's Haven online. The photos are beautiful. The reviews are glowing. What you've built there is extraordinary. You didn't just save yourself, Elizabeth. You're saving others. You took your pain and transformed it into something that helps people heal. I'm in awe of you. I'm sorry it took so long for me to say something that night at the party. I'm sorry. So many of us stayed silent. We all knew Richard was cruel to you, but we told ourselves it was a private marriage matter. We were wrong. I was wrong. But you were brave enough to save yourself when no one else would. And now you're teaching other women that they can do the same. That's heroic. I'm proud to have known you. I'm proud of who you've become. Margaret. I handed the phone back, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Not anger, not hurt anymore. Just a distant sadness for all the years lost, all the moments wasted. "How do you feel?" Michael asked, always attuned to my emotional weather. "Like that chapter is finally, truly closed." I leaned against him, solid and warm and real. "Richard will always be part of my story. He has to be, because that's how I got here. But he's not the story anymore. He's not the main character. He's just a plot point, a catalyst, the thing that had to happen so I could become who I'm meant to be." "And who's that?" I considered the question. Looking at the cafe with its warm lights glowing against the darkening evening, through the window I could see the cake display, the comfortable chairs, the books waiting to be read, the art on the walls. Tomorrow, the community room would host its first support group meeting. Survivors of financial abuse, learning their rights, their worth, their power. "Someone who helps," I said finally. "Someone who sees people struggling and says, 'You're not alone.' Someone who transforms pain into purpose." I smiled. Someone who makes really good cake. Michael laughed, pulled me closer. The best cake in 3 counties. Damn right. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one over the mountains. A couple walked past, holding hands, waved at us. A car drove by slowly, the driver admiring the cafe's exterior. This was my life now, this small town, this business, this man beside me, this sense of purpose that filled every morning when I woke up. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was mine, genuinely, completely mine. I need to bake, I said suddenly, standing. For tomorrow, the support group meeting. I want them to have fresh muffins, blueberry lemon, I think, something bright and hopeful. Michael laughed. It's 8:30 at night. The best baking happens at night. Everyone knows that, it's science. Is it now? Absolutely. Very official science. He followed me inside, settling at a corner table with case files while I tied on my apron and entered the kitchen that had become my sanctuary. The familiar motions calmed me, measuring flour, cracking eggs, the tactile pleasure of mixing ingredients by hand. Through the window, I could see the mountains standing eternal, indifferent to small human dramas. But here, in this warm space I'd created, those dramas mattered. Each cake I baked, each cup of coffee I served, each woman I helped find her courage, they all mattered. I thought about Jennifer from this afternoon, hoping she'd call the numbers I gave her, hoping she'd take that first terrifying step toward freedom. I thought about the dozen other women who'd probably walk through my doors in the coming months, all of them carrying stories similar to mine. And I thought about 28-year-old Elizabeth, signing her name to that marriage certificate, believing she was building a partnership, having no idea what the next 3 decades would bring. If I could go back and tell her anything, what would I say? That it would hurt worse than she could imagine, that she'd lose years to someone who didn't deserve them, that she'd forget who she was for so long. She'd think that woman was gone forever, but also that she'd survive, that she'd find strength she didn't know she possessed, that she'd build something beautiful from the ruins, that the best parts of her life would come after the worst parts ended, that it's never ever too late to start over. The muffins went into the oven. I set the timer, wiped down the counters, looked around my kingdom of flour and sugar and possibility. Michael looked up from his papers and smiled at me, that gentle, knowing smile that said he saw me, really saw me, and loved what he saw. I love you, he said, simple as breathing. I love you too, I replied, and meant it with every broken piece that had finally healed, every scar that had become strength, every dark moment that had led me here, to this light outside. The mountain stood sentinel under an infinity of stars. Inside Elizabeth's haven, the lights stayed on late into the night, a beacon for anyone who needed to find their way home, for anyone who needed to learn that you can disappear from the life that's killing you and emerge, phoenix-like, into the life that sets you free. The timer dinged. I pulled out perfect golden muffins, their tops cracked just right, their smell filling the kitchen with warmth and promise. Tomorrow, I'd share them with women learning to save themselves. Tonight, I'd celebrate the woman I'd become. And every day after this, I'd remember, I didn't just survive Richard Miller, I transcended him. This was my story now, mine alone, and it was just beginning.